Hello there. You are listening to Cinema Rex. It's an Iranian film podcast. Episode 31. Mania, Akbari, and Abbas Kiarostami's 10. Farhan, how's it going? Tell me something about your life.
They're doing renovations on my balcony. So all of my patio furniture is inside of my living room right now. And like, you can't see it from this angle, but yesterday you saw, and it was just like, you were like, it looks like your apartment threw up on itself.
Yeah, and all of your living room furniture is outside in the patio.
Imagine. Just getting covered in cement dust.
I want to just jump right into the subject of today because we have a lot to cover. Today we are discussing a highly controversial, much discussed film in what is formerly known as Abbas Kiarostami's 10. But what I believe we should address it as is, at very least, a co-directing project by a woman named Mania Akbari, who co-directed, or maybe even entirely directed this film. But at very least co-directed this with Abbas Kiarostami. And we will get into all of that detail, the nitty-gritty of the shitty, very shortly. But let's just dive right in. Farhan, you strapped and ready to go down this rabbit hole of treachery and deceit?
I sure am.
And also, of course, as always, Dur Bar Shama Dustan Aziz. This is the Cinema Rex podcast where we discuss all things Iranian film, cinema, music, acting, cars, driving, dash cameras, digital recorders. What else, Farhan?
Drilling on my balcony.
Drilling on your balcony. I'm Kaveh Mohebi.
And I'm Farhan Moradi.
10 is a docu-style visual examination in the form of 10 conversations. A female taxi driver, played by Mania Akbari, ferries 10 different passengers around Tehran, exposing herself to a wide swath of the city's populace and shedding light on the plight of women in the country. Among those who set foot inside her cab are a prostitute working the streets of Tehran and an elderly woman on her way to prayer. But there are also a multitude of familiar faces, including a friend who's broken up with her boyfriend and the driver's own son, who lashes out at his mother over divorcing his father in this pseudo-documentary social examination on the lives of Iranians. It has an 85% Rotten Tomato score and an 80% audience score. So Farhan, I turn it to you. As always, my partner in crime, what did you think of 10?
I have like mixed feelings about this one.
Controversy aside,
controversy aside.
Yeah, like the actual product itself.
Overall, the product itself felt a little unfocused. And having read some of the BTS stuff behind how the movie was made and how it was assembled, it kind of makes sense. Because it feels like there were these conversations that were kind of improv'd, and stitched together in a way that was like tangentially related to each other, whereas a movie like Taste of Cherry takes place all in a car as well for the most part, and it's much more focused. I also think earlier this week I had sent a script to Rob to review and like give me feedback on. And something that Rob told me, he was like, some of your dialogue is almost too realistic and it doesn't work when it's in a script. I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, when you have characters be like, hey, can you pass me the thing? What thing? That thing that's over there. What, over here? No, the other thing. Like when you get into that rhythm of dialogue, if you're watching it in a movie, it can feel a lot like filler. If this movie was scripted, it would probably only be like 30, 40 minutes. But there's so much filler just in the naturalistic dialogue that it expands it into the length of a feature-length film.
I hear what you mean. I don't know if it'd be 30, 40 minutes. There's still quite a lot of like discussions that each character is having on the topic of morality and sins and marriage and love and divorce.
Maybe. Like, and don't get me wrong, the contents of the themes that they touch on and the overall topics of the conversations, I think, are all excellent.
Yeah.
I think just it almost feels like Uncanny Valley.
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
Where it feels like fiction and it doesn't feel like fiction. And sometimes that works for me and sometimes it doesn't. And in this case, I think it feels a little awkward.
Well, and you know what? There's a clear path as to why you feel that way. And that is partially or almost entirely because of the fact that depending on who you ask, this film has two very different and opposing origin stories as to what the production of the film was. And we will get into those specific details in due time. But on its surface level, the Coles Notes version of it is Kiarostami says that this was a scripted project that he had planned and meticulously orchestrated. And Mania Akbari says that this was her sort of artistic, social, creative outlet, a social examination of character, and that it was a camera that she had placed for very real conversations she had with her friends and family. So from Mania Akbari's perspective, this was not a scripted film. This was an art project, a documentary, not hidden camera, but like a naturalistic, let me tape the conversations I have with my friends and family about things that matter to us. And the central conceit of the big debate is Kiarostami claims that under Mania's hijab was an earpiece where he was feeding her the lines. And she's saying that is flat out a lie. And then the discussion of whether or not the members, some certain members of, like, for instance, the prostitute who gets in the car, Kiarostami claims that was someone that they cast, a non-actor, but someone that they cast. Whereas Mania claims that's her sister, just taking on the role of a prostitute for a conversational scene. So that is totally why you feel that there's might be a cut and paste of tone, like very improvised one moment, but then maybe scripted another. It's just like you don't even know where to land in terms of how this project was made.
Yeah,
there are
100%.
Two very contrasting stories on it.
100%. That was something that I found out kind of afterwards. I was reading up on the controversy around it some more. And when I found that out, I was like, okay, this really puts things into perspective. Also, the thing that I read about the earpiece was that Kiarostami said that they only tried it once, and he said that it didn't really work very well. So then they had to try different approaches.
Yeah. I want to spend less time on the actual content of the film, although we should touch on it briefly.
Sure.
But the reason I think, like, there are literally 4 follow-up spiritual sequels to this film that have come out in various forms.
Yeah.
And I'll touch on them too. But the 4 that are mainly talked about is Kiarostami did sort of a DVD commentary breakdown of the behind-the-scenes process of making this film in a feature-length documentary called 10 on 10. Then there is a spiritual sequel called 5, which was Kiarostami's, like, it's a documentary, but it's almost just a visual landscape. It's a lot like his 24 frames, where it's 5 landscape images shot without a moving camera. One of them has the camera moving, but it's supposed to be like a spiritual sequel. It's called 5, dedicated to Ozu, which is Yasuhiro Ozu, the Japanese filmmaker. So this was supposed to be like almost like landscape portrait filmmaking, no narrative, just sort of like, as close to still photography as you can get. Then there is 10+4, which is Mania Akbari's essentially trying to reclaim her narrative, what she would call a sequel to this film, but it's now her after her being diagnosed with breast cancer and her process of going through treatment. She started putting the camera back in the car and having conversations, one with her son who had aged a few more years since the making of 10, and various other conversations. So much, this feels like the closest thing to a true spiritual sequel to the film. And then there's Letters to My Mother, which is Amina Maher's documentary project, which is Amina is a trans woman filmmaker who we see in the film 10 as the little boy in the front seat, who is actually Mania's daughter now.
The character of Amin is played by Amina Maher, who, while playing the role of the son at the time of filming, later came out as a genderqueer trans woman.
But let's go quickly over some of the 10 chapters, because this is easy to fly through, and I want to know any immediate thoughts you had. We start off with the mother and son, Amin and Mania. I really like the opening shot. I like the first 18 minutes is some of my favorite stuff, where it's a discussion, it's an argument about divorce. Mania has divorced her husband, and her young son, Amin, is very upset about it. And you slowly learn through this discussion that she at one point had to tell in court that her husband is a drug addict so she'd be able to get this divorce. And he's upset about that. Whether or not that element is true, you can see the tension there. And he's really quite rude to his mom.
Yeah.
The way he talks to his mother, you're like, oh, damn. Like, what?
It seems like the son is like clearly replicating his father.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah.
He's echoing his words in the house.
Also, just a little disclaimer. Kaba and I are not attempting to dead name the actor. We're talking specifically about the character whose name is Amin and is a boy in the film. So yeah, the woman arguing with the son, he's clearly replicating his dad.
Yeah.
And you can tell just like the things that he's saying, the way he's talking, he's like, you always say blah 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 blah. You're so selfish. You never think about anybody else. And then the mom will say something, and then he'll be like, "Oh, there you go again." Like he's very clearly emulating that.
Yeah, and you could just see that the grievances of whatever he's bringing up is almost echoing word for word what the father's probably saying at home.
Yes, yeah.
It's not the kind of stuff that a precocious 8-year-old child should be hearing or thinking about their mother.
Yeah.
That you're manipulative. You twist my words. This and this. It's like 8-year-olds don't think like that.
He even says at one point, he's like, when the mom's like, "Can I just say 2 things?" And then the son's like, "Sure." And then the mom starts talking, and then the son interrupts him and goes, "First of all, you said 3 things, and that was 3 things too many. And it was all lies.
Yeah.
Lies I wish not to hear." I was like, yo, this person is like...
Yeah.
If you had talked to your parents like that as a child...
I'd be thrown out a window.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I didn't have the cojones to speak that way to my mom.
Yeah.
Then the chapter 9, so it goes to chapter 9. It goes, it's cascading numbers 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
9 is she picks up her sister, and they're driving with her. She's driving with her sister, and they're picking up a cake. My main takeaway from this was I found it really interesting how different the sisters were. Mm-hmm. She's clearly a little bit more conservative with the wearing of her rusari. Mm-hmm. It's like tighter. There's no hair showing. But also, I really like this little idiosyncratic moment where she's constantly giving her sister little instructions on where to drive.
Yeah.
So Mania is driving. She's like, don't take this road here. No, like avoid that. She's like, watch this woman. Watch this woman. She's crossing. Don't hit her. And like, I actually love that. It almost very like I am assuming she's the older sister, but it had such older sister vibes to it, which was like kind of my favorite thing about that. It was an interesting character moment.
Have you had experiences like that with like either your parents or like uncles or aunts or anything in the car?
Yeah. My mother, who is a much worse driver than me, always gives me little like notes on how to drive. I'm like, I'm way better at this than you are. You have no idea how terrifying it is to be behind the wheel with you.
My dad does it to me constantly, and I wouldn't say he's a better or worse driver. It's just like he'll be like, "Oh, watch out for the speed bump," but I'm like, I can see it. Like it's on the road. What do you mean?
Chapter 8, he's picking up an old hitchhiker, an old woman who's on her way to a mausoleum.
Yeah.
I mean, this one was just whatever. It kind of, they talked about life and death and the power of prayer, and it all just seemed sort of, I've heard this conversation 100 times.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't care for it too much.
Just pointing out the mausoleum that they're going to. It's not just like some random mausoleum. It's like weird that everyone translates it to mausoleum too, because it's like, it is a mausoleum, but it's also practically used more as like a mosque or a shrine.
Yeah.
They call it Imamzadeh. It's because it's the mausoleum or the resting place or the shrine or whatever of the son of the 5th Imam in Shia Islam. Mm-hmm. So people will like go there and pray and like ask for certain things to happen and wishes and whatever. And the old lady, she like her like husband and son and like grandson or whatever have all like died, right?
Yeah. She had a 12-year-old son that had died. Her husband had died. She'd lost everybody. I mean, nothing too noteworthy about that from my perspective, because it's followed directly by one of the most interesting parts is when she picks up the sex worker. The camera's never on this individual, but we hear her voice. And I thought this was some of the most interesting dialogue in the film.
Yeah. Did you know right away that she was a sex worker, or did you like figure it out as the dialogue went on?
I don't remember because it's not my first time. I knew it was because it's my 3rd time seeing this movie.
Okay.
I saw it for my first time like close to 20 years ago.
I initially thought she was just like super drunk, but she could also be drunk.
Right.
But the way that the character comes across, she sounds very drunk.
Right.
And then as the dialogue went on, I was like, oh, okay.
What else did you think of the scene?
There's a moment where she says that all men are cheaters and liars, and women are stupid for believing otherwise.
Yeah.
Which I thought is kind of ironic given the like disputes of the film, that Kiarostami allegedly like stole all this stuff.
Yeah. That's an interesting point, actually.
That line really stands out so much more. That thing of like, all men are cheaters and liars.
In hindsight.
And you're stupid to believe them to believe otherwise. I was like,
Yeah.
Also, the first real shot in the film from outside the car is of the sex worker going up to the street and looking for another client. So you do end up seeing her, but it's from behind.
Then it's Our female protagonist driver picks up a woman from a mausoleum, a much younger woman than the old woman she dropped off, but it's unclear about their relationship throughout. I noticed that's a really interesting thing. We don't know how they know each other, but they seem to know each other.
I don't think they do.
They're what is it then? What is it? It's like an Uber driver pickup kind of situation?
I guess so.
It's very arbitrary. It's random.
Originally, it was supposed to be a psychiatrist whose office was being renovated. And so she's taking clients in the car, but the idea didn't work. And there isn't a lot of details as to why.
Well, the whole film was supposed to be that premise.
Yeah. Oh, something that I thought was funny was that a couple times throughout the film, she'll like honk at people for pulling over in random places and being like, what are you doing? Like, we're trying to drive here. And then in this scene, or in sorry, not this one, but the scene with her sister, she randomly pulls over to pick up a cake.
Yeah.
And when she pulls over, she's like, please just like 1 minute, 2 minutes. Like, I just need to run inside and get this thing. And then in this one again, she's honking at some guy for parking in some random place.
Yeah.
I just thought like the hypocrisy of that was really funny.
Yeah.
She mentions to the new believer that she picks up, because she was like, oh, I didn't used to believe, but like I've recently turned to religion and spirituality again because I'm trying to pray for my boyfriend to propose to me.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and she's like, and he seems like he's scared to get married, but I really want to marry him. And so they start to have a conversation about that, which is it's an interesting contrast to the scene with the sex worker, because the sex worker is like, oh, don't get married. Like, I tried that once, didn't go well, and all these men are cheaters, blah, 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 blah. And then in this scene, you have this woman being like, oh, all I want is this. Like, I'm praying to God for it, yada, yada, yada. It's funny that you go from like spiritual woman, sex worker to this. It's like, it's constantly juxtaposing these characters and their realities.
And this is the woman that's going to come back again in the second last sequence, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And also, I guess it's worth knowing that in the behind the scenes of this, like, this woman is a friend in real life of Mania's. This woman who's talking about wanting to pray for marriage,
right,
is a friend. So it does get the sense of like, you don't know what the relationship is, but in the behind the scenes, this is her friend.
Okay.
Then another scene of picking up her son and driving her son to the grandma's house.
Mm-hmm. I just wrote that she's a lot more patient with the son this time,
right,
than she is originally. And because she's more patient with the son, despite the fact that the son is still being a brat to her, the son does eventually end up opening up and like confides in her in her that like the dad's been watching adult programming at night and like locks the channels and stuff.
Yeah. The driver picks up her sister again, who's now crying and distraught over her husband leaving her after 7 years together. And as she cries, the driver tells her it's wrong to cling to him. You don't need man that much, blah, blah, blah. And now she's echoing the stuff the prostitute had said to her. So that's what I think is really interesting, is like these conversations are affecting her perspective and very drawing, like specifically drawing a line of like the words the sex worker was saying is now being used as advice that she's giving her older sister who's upset about the loss of a man. So I think you're slowly seeing this evolving kind of persona, she's like getting a little bit tidbits of like life advice from different people, and now she's applying them to future conversations.
She even says to her sister, she says, why must your worth be anchored to another person?
Exactly.
Which I thought was pretty damning.
Yeah.
You think that it also affected her approach to her son then?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, if the entire thing is like a reflection of the role of women, Iranian women, which I do think it is to an extent, then yeah, it's just like how are we learning from each other? It seems to be like a central kind of experiment. And then the eighth scene rather, is she picks up her son again. Time has passed. All right. I think in this scene, it's just my main thing of interest was that he starts comparing his dad's new girlfriend to his mom. And it's like, oh, she's so much nicer to me. She lets me do this, and her cooking doesn't smell the whole house and all this stuff like that.
The other thing too with that is, again, the mom is trying to open up with the son by being patient and compassionate.
Yeah, she's taking it all in stride, is the note I wrote. She's kind of laughing at stuff.
Well,
her mood
and
has changed.
She starts the conversation by saying like, hey, I think it might actually be a better idea for you to live with your dad.
Yeah.
So you have like a positive male role model.
Yeah.
And then he's like relieved and he's like, oh, thank God. Like, I'm so glad you see it my way because like you really suck, right? Like, dad's seeing this new girl.
Yeah.
She's so much better than you, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And she's like trying to take it in stride, like you said, until he loses his shit over the fact that she's like taking a detour to get gas.
Yeah.
Where's this kid going every time he storms out of the car?
Yeah, it feels like he just gets out in the middle of the road.
Yeah.
Busy streets of Tehran. Then the second last scene is the same mysterious woman who was praying earlier for a boyfriend and now says that the boyfriend won't marry her. He's thinking of someone else and this hurts her. Despite how much she prayed for his love, he doesn't love her back. And I think this is one of the most powerful scenes in the movie because she asks this woman, why do you wear your rusaris so tight?
Because last time she didn't. Last time it was very loose.
It was very loose on her
She's like,
last
what?
time.
Yeah, she's like, what happened that you're wearing it so tight this time?
And she takes off her rusari to reveal what?
She shaved her head.
Yes. And it's a moment of liberation or joy or sorrow. But either way, the woman is moved to tears by her removing her rusari and showing her shaved head.
Mm-hmm.
And the driver is talking about how beautiful she looks, but also very shocked as to why she did it.
Right.
What are your thoughts on this? I have many thoughts, but I want to save it for deeper analysis.
It's funny that you're asking me my thoughts on the buzzed head because I was going to ask you if you felt that she did this in an act of defiance or depression. It feels like maybe a bit of both. That she
That's
was
what
like,
I was going to say. It's both.
She was maybe almost pushed to this point because of like initially because of the depression.
Yeah.
And being like, oh, this sucks, blah, 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 blah. But then being kind of like, well, I'll show you, I'm going to reclaim my autonomy. Because even earlier on in the film, there's a few times where the driver talks about position of women in Iran. And like all throughout the film, there's different angles of commentary on the roles of women in Iran, whether it's as a friend, as a sister, as a mother, almost like a daughter to the old lady. And then with this woman too, she shaves her head and it's kind of this cathartic release after being like, you can't control me.
Yeah.
I wear the rusai to cover my hair. Well, now I don't have hair.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? On the buzzed head, defiance, depression?
Well, there's a lot I'll break down in deeper analysis, but I think that the idea of a woman, Iranian woman living in Iran with a shaved head is such an act of defiance. What do you know what the specific laws are now? If a woman has a completely shaved head, does she still have to wear a rusai or no?
I don't know.
That'd be interesting to figure out. I would assume not, because showing then her with the buzzed head would have. Well, okay, then we'll get into that too with the controversial stuff from the government's perspective, because the government, of course, had thoughts on this film as well. So
I'd be interested to hear your deeper analysis on this now, because like this is a weird episode because it's like 10 vignettes.
Okay.
So like it's kind of hard to like go back and forth. So I'm kind of curious to know what your deeper analysis on the shipped hair.
So this is like a deep character study on modern Iranian women, modern by the 2002 era, right? There's no men in this movie except for a little young boy and the husband that we kind of barely see a few times in like the car, you know, like you don't really, he doesn't get in the car. So aside from that, this film is entirely made of women and one young boy. The shaved head in a lot of Iranian cinema stuff we've covered, especially when we talk about things like Baran, signifies not only the removal of the physical veil, but also of the constraints put on women's self-expression.
Yeah.
When women shave their head, whether it's from depression or an act of defiance, they're putting up their restrictions against a government that's telling women what to do with their hair to cover it up and hide it. So again, my man Hamid Nafisi in A Social History of Iranian Cinema says, 10 does not deal directly with political issues. In one scene, however, it offers one of the most searing critiques of the veil by any Iranian director up to that date. A critique that is as powerful as it is subtle. A female passenger removes her scarf for her driver friend, revealing her shaved head. She is filled with a quiet but compelling surge of emotion, which spills out of her in the form of tears, which she herself admits are both tears of joy and sorrow. And when he talks about the role of the shaved head in films, Nafisi refers to films like Maryam Shahriyar's Daughters of the Sun, Dokhtaran Khorshid, which I'd referenced in Baran as well, which centers on a daughter whose head is being shaved by her father so that she can pass as a young boy to work in a carpet shop, and only showing the hair once it's cut from the head in its disembodied form, locks falling to the ground, points that it's the only permissible way to show women's actual hair in Iranian cinema. and it was a specific point she was making. So hair throughout cinema, specifically women's hair, in the last 20, 30, 40 years has always become the symbol of whether it's oppression or freedom from that oppression or fighting. It's a very important tool and image to use. Women Life Freedom Movement, how much of that was about cutting locks of your hair off, right? So I think like in a film about the role of modern Iranian women, revealing this woman who is having this moment of all of complicated emotions to reveal her shaved head is saying something. It's not nothing. I mean, I don't want to necessarily say for audiences what it could be, but it's a lot of the stuff of just saying the removal of the physical veil, the physical constraints, the forcing down of self-expression by the government, and it's freedom from that. That's my main takeaway from what I think that scene implies.
I think that's really beautiful.
Thank you.
I want to also touch on what you were talking about with showing the hair on the ground is allowed. Like, it's interesting that like you can show locks of hair falling to the ground.
Yeah.
In its disembodied form.
Yeah.
You can show a woman's head with no hair on it as long as the neck is covered.
They physically can't be touched.
Yeah, if you put the hair on the head, can't show it.
Yeah.
And I love that all these filmmakers are like trying to find that line of like what's allowed and what's not.
Yeah. The final sequence is the shortest sequence. It's just her picking up her son one last time and having a slightly longer conversation with her husband who's across the street. The son gets in the car and says, all right, let's go to grandma's house. And then the scene ends there. The film ends there.
Why do you think that he keeps wanting to go to grandma's and refuses to go to the mom's house?
I don't know. I just figured it felt like it was part of their daily routine.
There's got to be a reason for it.
Kids. Like zooming out of the actual film itself.
Yeah.
When we get to behind the scenes, if you're going by, and I think you should, what Mania Akbari says, these weren't scripted scenes. This was just their life. She was filming it. Like this was just their daily routine or whatever. Like the camera was there. I mean, Amina just claims to this day that she had no idea the camera was filming.
Right.
I just think that you're capturing, if you look at it from Mania's perspective, it's just a film that's capturing their daily routine. Right. I don't have a deeper subtext on that.
Okay.
Not everything can be genius bombs, Faran. Some of them just have to be, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Right.
You might have something. I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have one.
I mean, listen, if it was put to me as like an assignment, I'd probably say something along the lines of like, I don't know, the relationship with the mom is frayed and maybe the son resents the mother for leaving the son with the father. And maybe deep down the son doesn't like the father. Mm-hmm. And he's kind of taking on the role of the father because he's like, well, I know that this will hurt my mom. And I was hurt by her leaving and abandoning me here. And he still wants a positive female role model in his life, but doesn't want to concede that to the mom. So that's why every time she picks him up, she's like, well, I want to go to grandma's. Because at least grandma is like far enough removed that he's not blaming her for the situation he's in.
Okay, the behind the scenes and trivia. This has got a lot of controversy, as I mentioned a few times. Kiarostami has characterized 10 as a fiction film, an account disputed by Akbari since 2020. According to Kiarostami, the scenes were originally written as you had mentioned, Farhan, a psychologist conducting sessions out of her car while her office is being renovated. It was an idea he had gotten from a friend. He tried to work it out as a project. This premise was altered after it was deemed unworkable. So basically the scenario was, in a word, that a woman gave advice to one of her clients, and because the woman complained that the counsel that she had received from her had led to a divorce, to divorcing her husband, and she regrets her decisions, a court had found the psychoanalyst guilty and closed her office, so she decides to drive her patients in a car for a week. That was the idea of the story he wanted to make. He liked the idea because it took place in a car, which is a place he likes to shoot films. But then realizing that a psychoanalyst doesn't talk much, it meant the script would be a lot of a monologue, right? Because psychoanalysts listen. And he put the idea aside. But in doing the research, he'd met a lot of interesting people. This is what Kiarostami claims.
Right.
In August 2020, Akbari accused Kiarostami of plagiarism, stating that 10 consisted of footage shot by her. According to Akbari, she recorded 120 hours of video for a personal project. Akbari was not planning to use the content for a film, and she stated that none of the women involved in the film ever made a single cent for their participation in 10. So there's some credence to her claim because almost everyone involved in this film is either a relative or close friend of Akbari. The son was her son. The sister was her sister. The woman who shaved her head was a close friend of hers, a woman named Katayun. according to Akbari, the woman who plays the sex worker is also her sister doing a performance. Kiarostami had told her he was interested in developing it into a script. Kiarostami shot 3 parts of the film, one with Amran Adil as the boy's father, and 2 where the sex worker and the religious women exit the car. He shot additional footage that was not included in the film. He ultimately acted as editor on 10, using Akbari's original footage, and showed her a final cut without any credits. Kiarostami later recreated the behind-the-scenes content after 10's premiere. So according to Akbari, essentially, he came on as editor. He liked a lot of the ideas of what was going on there. He said, let me take over. When the film got into Cannes, there was a lot of confusion of like, just follow what I say. We have to tell him this is a fictional film or else like this only will get like into Cannes. And she kind of, went with it. Like a powerful, famous director is like taking you under the wing and said like, trust me, these are the things we have to do to get acclaim. And Akbari claims that he deliberately covered his tracks by shooting behind the scenes and taking photographs and like making like situations that made it seem like if once it was being contested whether or not he made the film, he would have all this behind the scenes footage to prove it and back it up.
So is the claim that he shot additional stuff?
Yeah,
as like an alibi.
Yes, and exactly, and he took photos of him on set with the camera behind it. It's not even the camera they used, like it's a digital recorder, but it's like he is very like masterfully, according to Akbari, set up all these scenarios where he would take pictures of him on set with the people, whatever, to make it seem like when it was being argued, he would have evidence as an alibi. Adil confirmed that Kiarostami invited him to be in the film and shot.
Maybe it's Adil.
Adil confirmed that Kiarostami invited him to be in the film and shot his scenes. He responded that he believed Akbari's claims to be frivolous. Now, this is the guy that played the husband in a few scenes.
Right.
Which is like he's barely in the film. Amina Maher, Akbari's daughter, created the 2019 short film Letters to My Mother, in which she stated that her scenes from 10 were filmed without her knowledge. The end credits for 10 list the cast and crew's names without specifying their role on the film. And Akbari claims that when Kiarostami had showed her the final cut of the film, initially there was no credits attached. So when she essentially got on stage during Cannes and was being interviewed as if she's an actor on the film, she was shocked for the first time. And Kiarostami was like, just go with what I'm saying. This is going to help us.
That's wild.
Akbari and Maher asked distributor MK2 to halt circulation of the film, but did not receive a response. Because during the festival campaign, Akbari started distancing herself from Kiarostami. She stepped away from the press campaign. The film was banned in Iran because of 4 sequences that were deemed unsuitable for the public viewing, particularly around discussions of gender discrimination, to which Kiarostami had said that if I'd adhered to the censors, I'd have to name the film 6. So essentially what it comes down to is, and I don't want to go over all the beats of 10 on 10, but Kiarostami ended up making a follow-up film, which is essentially what DVD commentaries are, but it's him without any crew. It's just a camera in a car talking about his process of making the movie 10, which I gotta admit is also a little suspicious because he didn't really do that for any of his other films.
Yeah.
And he didn't have anyone else get involved in doing this. It was just him and a camera in a car being like, and then when I wanted to make this scene, I did this.
When I first came across it, I was like, I didn't realize that it was a documentary for 10. I was like, oh, is this for Life Goes On?
Yeah.
But then I was like, no, wait, maybe it's for Taste of Cherry. And then I was like, oh, wait, no, this is for 10.
Because he talks about all of those films too.
Yeah.
He'll mention all of them. He revisits a lot of the scenes from his previous films too. At one point, he goes into this detail talking about how Katayun sings, the woman who shaves her head. The sequence ends with her singing a song. It's a very beautiful song. And Kiarostami says while editing the film, he thought the song was so beautiful, but at the same time, he said, quote, I edited that version with the song for the ending. Then I used the same melody played by the piano, but I felt it was too sentimental. Finally, I changed the ending by taking another sequence. I thought the sad woman and the melancholy would overwhelm the audience. He didn't want to overly manipulate to the audience, even though the song came from the heart and was an honest moment, which he loved. So, for sure, Kiarostami was the editor of this film. And maybe in the process of editing it, he kind of shot a few additional scenes to kind of give this feeling a closed sense of like structure. But it's, I would leave it to listeners to come up to their own decision. I don't want to tell people how they should feel about it, but there are pretty strong claims for Akbari for what she's saying here. And it's worth, if you're going to be a fan of Kiarostami's work and the film 10, you should look into Akbari's filmography as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you can get a hold of 10 plus 4, which is sort of her reclaiming the narrative, it's worth seeing what is essentially a sequel to this film.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you want to do all your research, watch 10 on 10 and then watch 10 plus 4 and then watch 10. And then you have your entire, like, that's your filmography for the day.
I mean, you've covered all the numbers.
Yeah, you got every number there.
Mania also made a movie called 20 Fingers.
Made 20 Fingers.
So you covered on the number 20.
Yeah.
30 minutes to 6 a.m. You've got 30 and 6 covered. 1 to 1. You got a couple more numbers there.
Yeah, this is the other thing. It's a very Kiarostami thing he says, and then I'll leave behind the scenes and trivia. But Kiarostami claims that he was putting the earpiece inside Akbari's ear and feeding her lines, and you can't see it because of a Rusari.
For one instance, he says that.
And at the same time, though, he's doing the very Kiarostami of saying, I didn't do anything. I put the camera there and watched people unfold. You know what I mean? Like how he always talks about how he doesn't want to be an intervener. He says, decided to change my plot and story based around the new material. Gather interesting people in the car. As a screenwriter, I just had to give shape to these characters.
Yeah.
I wanted the absence of a heavily critical eye, not there to judge or criticize. I was more of a curious viewer of performance. That's how he's describing it. And exact quote is, regarding the movie, he states, if anyone were to ask me what I did as a director on the film, I'd say nothing. And yet, if I didn't exist, this film wouldn't have existed. Which is a very curious thing to say. And that can be taken in two completely different ways.
Well, especially when we've seen a number of times where at festivals, when Kiarostami is asked, hey, how much of this is improv, blah, 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 he goes, oh, none of it. I wrote it all. And I'm very flattered to hear that you think that it was improv and you thought it was real conversations. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then here he's like, oh, no, I just sat back and watched. And that's part of my role as a director. Like, because even if you're directing something, let's say he directed it, to be like, oh, improvise this entire scene, you owe it to those actors to give them more than just an acting credit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I'm going based on, if we are to believe what Kiarostami says is 100% what happened, I still think that the credits that he's giving people is unethical. I think that they deserve way more than what he's giving them.
Yeah. Mania Akbari claims Kiarostami ended up never writing a script. He just edited the existing footage. She says at the end of 10, you see that he didn't add credits for its director, writer, or actors. He just wrote our names, Abbas Kiarostami and Mania Akbari, not stating who did who. At the premiere of 10 at Cannes, Kiarostami told her that it was, quote, your film, I just edited your rushes. Mania was surprised to hear that 10 made it to the official selection at Cannes. However, shortly before screening at Cannes, things changed. He told me, you know, Mania, this film is fiction. I was shocked because I never had this feeling about the film. He told me, just follow me, repeat everything I say. He told me the film would never have been selected for Cannes and win a prize if we didn't say it was fiction and that he had directed it. Which, to be honest, I actually kind of admit that part with Kiarostami.
Yeah,
Kiarostami's telling Mania that it's like, if my name's not attached to this and we don't tell him it's fiction, it's not going to get into Cannes and we're not going to win a prize.
He's probably not wrong.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of agree with that, which is the shitty thing to say about it. But also, like, I don't think if Mania had produced this film on her own and edited her own film, it's getting into Cannes.
And that has nothing to do with the content of the film. I think part of that has to do with
It's networking.
Yeah.
Political bullshit.
Yeah.
He convinced me to say that we were actors in the film, and this is how he sold the film to the world. This was his way to gain prestige and commercial success. I was 26 on a stage in front of hundreds of people sitting next to an acclaimed director. I felt I had no choice but to confirm what he said. He wanted to tell the world that he directed this film. He wanted to tell how the boy had acted. So this became the truth. Because also, you know, Kiarostami has a strong affinity for young child actors. So he must have been very, like, moved by Amina's performances. Mm-hmm. And he was like, oh, if we tell people I directed this young child to act this way, it's really good for my reputation as a good director of children. Mm-hmm. I mean, it goes on. There is a lot. There's a really good article I encourage people to look up. It's by Altyazi Fasikul.
What?
If you Google Mania Akbari tells her own story, you'll find a very well-written article by Fatima Edelman, who interviewed Mania Akbari, and she goes into great detail about the events following Cannes. And There's a trigger warning because the article includes descriptions and discussions of sexual violence and abuse. That may be triggering to some readers, but again, if you find yourself interested in the story behind 10, it's probably an incomplete story if you haven't heard her perspective of the events. Shall we move on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Critical reactions. The critical consensus says 10 turns a conversational car ride into a gritty and compelling character study full of real emotion while providing an intriguing look into the lives of women in contemporary Iranian culture. It was the 2002 nominee for Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, which is like the highest honor you can get at one of the best film festivals in the world. For the New York Times, A.O. Scott wrote, Kiarostami understands the automobile as a place for reflection, observation, and above all, talk. Roger Ebert was critical of how 10 presented its themes, writing that to praise the film for this is like praising a child for coloring between the lines.
But didn't Roger Ebert also give like House of Sand and Fog and Not Without My Daughter high praise?
Yeah, he did.
Those ones were groundbreaking.
Yeah.
Way outside of the lines.
This film got a lot of people excited and a lot of people talking, and Kiarostami received all the praise for it. Deeper analysis I covered, the head shaving.
Yep.
And what was your deeper analysis, you said? You covered it as well?
That was the same. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Best scene. What was your favorite scene in the film?
I think it's a tie for me. Do you want to go first? Because I have two.
Okay, sure. Mine is I've rewatched the opening 18-minute segment with her son like multiple times in my life. When I was really young, when I first saw it in 2004, really young. I mean, when I was younger, I remember being really engrossed.
I mean, 2004, that was 20 years ago, Cobb.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. I was 5 then. So, the opening argument with the son, I think, like resonated to some of the arguments. I mean, I've never been that rude to my mother, although she might argue that I have been. But it resonated. It just felt like hearing a son and mother argue that way in Farsi, like for the first time in 2004 when I watched the film. I was like, oh, this resonates. Like getting upset and like arguing in Farsi this way and like having a passionate, heated argument about something.
Did it feel cathartic to you that it's like...
I was like, oh, like it was the first time hearing
this
arguing.
Child can articulately say everything in Persian that I can't.
I loved his Farsi. I remember feeling like, wow, that's really impressive. But also like, it was my first time really witnessing an argument outside of my family in another language.
Right.
Like I've seen argument scenes in English 100 times. I'd never seen it that passionately evoked in the film in Farsi before.
Yeah.
I love that. I've seen it 100 times.
It felt a lot like some of the arguments in Abbasi films.
Even more heated, though, I'd say.
Not Abbasi, sorry, in Farhadi films.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's a toss-up between that same one, for the reasons that you gave, but also the second last one with the girl who shaved her head.
Yeah,
just because the shaving of the head was very cathartic.
Yeah. Damn, that's poetry. Do you have a favorite quote?
I do. I have one line that stood out above the others.
Yeah.
It's in the first vignette with her son.
Yeah.
A woman has no right to exist. A woman has no right to freedom. Must a woman die for her to live?
حق زندگی کردن نداره این زن. حق حیات نداره. زن باید بمیره تا بتونه زندگی کنه.
Yeah. I actually had marked that down as I was trying to think of potential favorite scenes.
Yeah.
But it was supplanted by 2 other ones, which I'll give.
That one to me, I think really set the scene for the rest of the film. Mm-hmm. And even by the end of the film, there were other ones that I wrote down, but that one I think still above the others for me really encapsulates the themes of the rest of the film.
Yeah. Mine is, it's funny that I don't describe it as one of my favorite scenes, although it is the scene with the sex worker. Mm-hmm. I think that sex worker just drops some awesome lines. The sex worker highlights that all of life is a trade. Everything in life is give and take. And then referring to the role of women, she says, you're the wholesalers, we're the retailers.
شما on the fruit, not for the fruit.
Favorite performance, I'll go first. Amina Maher playing the young child.
Yeah, me too.
I really, really like that actress in that scene.
Me too. She's so good.
Yeah, really good.
Is she still acting like as an adult? I know she became a filmmaker too, but is she still acting?
Yeah, like in Letters to My Mother, it's very autobiographical, so she's like the lead in it. But I think,
aside from films that are made like within the family,
I don't think so. I think more of an activist filmmaker more than anything.
She has a couple credits, or like 4 credits on IMDb. Mm-hmm. but it's not even included in the like known for like the highlighted credits are writer, director, editor.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you want to see the roles that she's played as an actor, you have to physically toggle it on.
Yeah.
And she hasn't been in an IMDb credited role as an actor since 2016.
Yeah. Festival of Cons. Look, we've discussed this entire episode could be a festival of cons. Like all the things that are problematic and aged poorly. Faron?
Between each vignette, there's like a little countdown as if like you're counting down to the start of a reel. And that countdown looks it looks like garbage. It looks like someone made that with like Windows Movie Maker. Yeah, the sound effect for it is terrible. It's just so poorly made. It looks like a temp graphic, the 10 countdown animations. Not a fan.
I think, again, I don't want to touch too much on it. It's going to be triggering as hell, but it's worth mentioning that on top of everything, Mania Akbari has claimed Kiarostami has sexually assaulted and raped her on more than one occasion. It's worth noting that everyone else who worked on the film claims Mania's version of the story.
Except for the
Kiarostami.
No, and the dad. Or
the husband. But the husband's like, I don't even know. I can't even tell you what the husband looks like.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a guy passing her in a car. Like, who knows who that guy was to Kiarostami? I mean, everyone else from
well, it's interesting that you have like
friend,
yeah. All the
they're like,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying sister, friend. They're like, Kiarostami wasn't around for that. Didn't give me notes. Didn't tell me anything.
Yeah. Meanwhile, you have like this one man who's barely involved in the movie is the only one being like, oh, I don't believe her, blah, 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 blah. Like it has Me Too vibes in some ways too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and when you pair in the fact that like there's also the sexual assault allegations and the rape allegations, like it's like, man, and bundled in with what a lot of the women are saying throughout the film.
Well, yeah.
I think that this movie should be studied extensively with all the behind the scenes stuff in a lot of gender study classes around the world.
And Mania, who actually doesn't want this film distributed anymore and seen by people, actually alludes to exactly what you're saying, says he's claiming that he had a headphone in my ear. He was only able to say this because of the hijab. Can you see the metaphor of control here? He is in my ear. Women have been fighting against mandatory hijabs for 40 years, and here he is using it to take control of me. Which is a very interesting metaphor for all this. He's saying, I was in her ear, you can't see because of the hijab, and it's literally a metaphor for control. He's using the hijab to get, like, it's a really fascinating perspective for her to take.
Yeah. Here's my thing, okay? I believe Mania's account of things.
Yeah.
Personally, right? When I'm saying things like allegedly, largely it's to avoid some kind of libel lawsuit from Kiarostami's estate.
Right.
But if we're to go by Mania's account of things, it's really upsetting to me that she would have spent all this time getting this footage, working with these people, and she never got to tell her story that she meant to tell.
Yeah.
Like art is meant to be a reflection of the soul. And it feels like someone stole that voice from somebody and went and made their own thing from it. And I think that is heartbreaking.
Yeah. It's really shitty.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if Kiarostami did intend to make this movie about this psychiatrist, yada, yada, yada. And they attempted this earpiece thing once for like a couple minutes and it like didn't work. And then later he went and he took all of her footage because he realized that he couldn't make his movie anymore. So he like made a new movie using all of her footage. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if there's like a kernel of truth in what Kiarostami's saying in that he tried to make this other movie, but then everything that Mania is saying is also true in that this was all footage that she had shot herself personally for her own project. Yeah. And he took it to try to complete his original film.
Well, I almost feel like the way filmmaking works too is like this was probably just one idea. The psychoanalyst idea is like one of many he had.
Right.
But he just couldn't figure out how to get it through because like it'd all be monologues and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And then while he's trying to figure out how to do this film, he just sees the footage Mania has made and goes, oh, this is very close to what I was going to do.
Yeah.
I'll come on as editor and do this. And then with the wave of like, oh, we got into Cannes, I have to say I'm the director to keep maintaining. Like, it's just like, it doesn't start off as this like architecturally planned, masterminded, villainous thing, but little by little, he puts the breadcrumbs to become a little bit shittier, claim a little bit more ownership.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, before you know it, it's Abbas Kiarostami's 10.
There's a lot of instances of this, where like these auteur filmmakers will ride that wave of like press and coverage and festivals and all this stuff. And then years later, you find out, or even sometimes you get inkling of notions that, oh, this wasn't an O Tour thing. This was actually made by all these other artists. And this O Tour has completely taken advantage of that. And sometimes people feel like they can't speak up, or sometimes they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. Sometimes it's almost like a Stockholm syndrome thing where like you feel like you owe it to that person because they like propped you up out of obscurity, you know?
100%. When Mania Akbari spoke out in 2020 after Kiarostami's death, she brought all this stuff up. And people are like, why are you saying this stuff now? And it's like, well, you don't know the process of like the trauma that he's imposed on your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you feel shackled. Like there's so many times she describes the years after this being like she wanted to apologize to Kiarostami and like try to like make up, and like he kept being in her life and all this stuff. And it's like, bro, you were like taken advantage of.
Yeah,
like,
you're the victim.
Yeah. But from her perspective, it's like it wasn't until he died that she was able to like actually start talking about this.
Yeah.
All our heroes are monsters.
Not Batman. Batman's great.
I want to say what Amina said too. This is worth mentioning. Amina mentions, this film is an example of power abuse on its deepest level. A Palme d'Or winner filmmaker who was at the time the most established Iranian filmmaker globally, and a very well-established production company like MK2 used private material of a child without the child knowing, and that she was being recorded for filmmaking purposes. They then distribute it and sell it globally as well. This happens while Abbas Kiarostami lies about how the film has been created in 100 different ways. As an example, he repetitively said that the film had been scripted and I was trained as a non-actor. The scenes in which I appeared in this film are around 34 minutes long, and only around 2 minutes of it did I know the camera was on, recording me. And only in these 2 minutes, Abbas Kiarostami and Kamran Adel, who had a small role as my father, were there for filming, and I knew that the camera was recording. In the other 32 minutes of the scenes in which I appear, I had no clue that I was being recorded, and that it was my absolute private life.
Man,
that's what the young child from the film is saying years later.
That is so violating too.
Yeah. I think that's partially what Letter to My Mother is about. I tried to watch it. I was able to watch the first third of the film, and then like it cut to be like, if you continue watching this, pay for a monthly subscription to a streaming service I'd never even heard of. So I couldn't finish watching it. But from what I understand, it's like the opening 5 minutes are scenes from 10. And then it's Amina shaving her chest, her legs in the bathtub, like shaving all of like chin, like everything, all the hair coming off. And then it's about how damaging that, like she specifically extrapolating the lines she said as a young child about how my life isn't mine. As a child, I don't get to say what's for me. Because the child says that a few times. Remember about the divorce and like, I don't get a say in this divorce.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's that's why I said this was a complicated film to talk about. Double feature lineup.
You go first, because I'm kind of on the fence between two of them, and I wonder if either one of these is yours.
Are you okay? I have two as well.
Okay. Why don't you give one, and then I'll give one, and then you give your second, and I'll give my second.
Okay. My number one, like go-to obvious one would be Tehran Taxi, also known as just Taxi, by Jafar Panahi.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen it, so I couldn't have programmed
It's
that.
very similar in execution. I think it's actually kind of better, to be honest. But you can totally tell. I think Panahi's just straight up admitted he was inspired by this film. So it's Panahi specifically himself driving around. The camera's largely on him, picking up passengers, doing different things. It's clearly inspired by this film, and it's just him. It's very similar, like him driving around in a car, picking up passengers. Called Taxi or Tehran Taxi. So that's my first one. What's your first one?
That's solid. My first one is Taste of Cherry.
Okay, yeah.
Because it is a similar setting where it's two different people, or like one person driving around with multiple other people in the car, and they're having these conversations.
Yeah.
It's much more scripted. Yeah, I think it'd just be like interesting to have a night of these car conversation scenes back to back. But I would also be worried that it would be almost like it would almost make people kind of tired and restless, because you're instead of watching an hour and a half of two people in a car, you're watching like 3 or 4 hours of two people in a car.
Yeah.
My second double feature lineup as an alternative is There Is No Evil, which we also reviewed for the podcast. That's Rasulov, right?
Yeah.
It's another vignette film, And it would just be interesting to show these two different approaches to the vignette films.
Right.
That might be my main pick, just because I think it might be kind of immoral to show 10 with a Kiarostami film.
Right. Well, that's why my second pick and my main pick is 20 Fingers by Mania Akbari.
Nice.
A film in several episodes with actor named Bijan Danishmand and Mania Akbari exposing some of the issues of men and women within the confines of tradition and family life in Iran. Essentially, it's like each episode displays a different form of male-female interaction. The film deals with the roots of dependencies, limitations, power struggles, and conflict that are familiar stuff of life in couples in the Middle East. From what I'd heard is that in the film, it's these like little vignettes again, very similar to 10. And Bijan Danishmand and Mania Akbari play a couple, but in every vignette they both play a different couple.
That's cool.
So like they're playing different people, but still a couple, but always the same two actors. So that's 20 Fingers. I haven't seen it, but I feel like that would be a good double feature if you're looking for
That's pretty cool.
something to justify it. Can this be into a modern Hollywood remake?
Sure. I don't know if Hollywood would do it. I feel like there's a little bit of an aversion for these.
Anthology.
Thank you. These anthology films in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Usually, if they get made, they just kind of play in Sundance and then no one really hears about them. Even if they have like big directors, a lot of times they're not very successful here for some reason.
Well, playing the game of producer, I would say if I had the freedom, I would say yes. I would give Mani a bunch of money to reshoot the entire thing with a bigger budget and have full creative control. That's what I want to see happen.
Do you think she would want to?
No.
I feel like it would be so traumatic.
I don't think she'd want to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think she'd want to. But I'm just saying that's the offer I'd put on the table.
In a lot of ways, this film put her on the map.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm curious if she had the choice, would she choose to have the film be erased from history if it meant that she would never be discovered as a filmmaker internationally? Like red pill, blue pill. Like red pill is the status quo. Blue pill is this movie never gets made. You never have to go through the trauma of any of this, but you never get discovered internationally as a filmmaker.
Final thoughts and grades. Why don't you go with your grades and final thoughts?
Overall, I think conceptually it's an interesting idea. I really like the themes that are touched on in each of the vignettes.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest issue that I have with the film is that it feels like there isn't very much focus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And given everything that we talked about with the behind the scenes of this film, that kind of makes sense. You know what I mean? Like a lot of that dialogue feels almost too realistic. And I would have liked to have seen what Mania was planning to do with her version of this film a lot more. And because it's almost like one person taking someone else's words and reinterpreting it in a totally different way, the entire film feels a little awkward.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
So I'm giving this a C+. I was like on the fence between a C and a C+, but there's enough there in terms of the thematic touchstones that it engages me that I was able to bump it up to a C+. But yeah, I'm really sad and really upset that we never got to see Mania's version of things.
I have to kind of agree. I think the film, it does lack focus. It does suffer from this malaligned reordering of ownership and who created what and who discovered this film from editing and who shot. Like it I don't think it's. To be honest, pretty shocked at all the praise and accolades it's received from people, but I don't know what to make of. The strongest elements to me are the things about like what the sex worker is saying and that stuff with the woman who revealing her shaved head, and on the surface level discussion of the role of Iranian women, modern Iranian women. Like that stuff's really interesting. It just seemed to lack a little bit of focus of that. And if you are going to go down the route of this is an experimental documentary, then yeah, you have credence to that. I just don't think it's a game changer the way it's been described by a lot of critics.
Yeah.
I would probably be a little bit more kinder than you just because I think the stuff about the head shaving as a metaphor for restraint and stuff is really powerful. I'd give it a B minus.
I mean, we're in the same vein. Like I toyed with giving it a C++ at one point.
Yeah.
It's because of things like the head shaving metaphor that I gave it that plus. So that means that the Cinema Rex official grade for this film is a C++.
10 is a minimalist film full of realism that is deceptively simple and uncluttered. This seemingly random collection of vignettes is so formally fascinating and authentically performed, one could be fooled into believing that they are watching a pure documentary. Yet, these vignettes collectively craft an emotionally cohesive arc. By centering the perspective of a contemporary Iranian woman as she navigates both literal and metaphorical paths through her world, the film transcends cultural boundaries to deliver a resonant parable on human connection. However, as he demonstrated in close-up, Kiarostami is unafraid to blur, even dismantle, the boundary between fiction and documentary. Here, he may have crossed into uncharted ethical territory, navigating dangerously close to the realms of appropriation, artistic deception, and downright plagiarism. Actions that have indelibly marked 10 with controversy. In viewing it today, one cannot fully detach from its morally fraught spectacle, nor easily discern where its narrative truth lies. Ultimately, 10 invites each viewer to grapple with its legacy, prompting a personal reckoning, to appreciate, question, reconcile its layered truths on their own terms. For a more well-rounded comprehension and appreciation of the film, CinemaRex Podcast invites you to discover the films of 10's other creative force, Mania Akbari, starting with the film's spiritual sequel 10+4 and her other award-winning feature films. And Farhan, that is 10. Here we are at the end of the road. I want to thank our audiences for listening. Farhan, you know how I feel about you.
Unfortunately. Thank you, Kaveh.
And to all of our listeners, be omid didar.
Bye. Also, like, comment, subscribe, leave a review, share, tweet. Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Sadinejad.